Okay, these are our notes for section 1.1, and we're going to go over vocabulary in this video. And there's quite a bit of vocabulary, but we're going to use these words throughout geometry, so you need to make sure that you understand them. If you have any questions about what these words mean, make sure you bring them to class and get them cleared up, because again, we will use these words for the rest of the year. All right, first thing we're going to look at, there are three terms that are considered undefined terms in geometry. That means they really have no definition. I can give you ways to think about them and you can identify them, but there's really no formal definition for these words. And they are point, line, and plane. We're going to start with point. Now, one way of thinking about a point is a location. Okay, it's a spot. And when we get into using the coordinate plane, and you should be familiar with that, that's the x and the y axis, points have specific spots on there. The point 1, 1 has a specific spot on the coordinate plane. So one way to think about them is as a location. Now, to name a point, you use a capital letter. Okay, so here's our point, and let's say we want to name it A. So we would have point A, or just A. And that's how we name a point. Again, you can think of a point as a location, and to name it, we use a capital letter. Capital block letter. Don't use cursive, just a capital letter. All right, our second undefined term is a line. And a line, which you should be familiar with, is always going to be straight, has no curves. Okay, the line I've drawn here is a horizontal line. Now, you can have a line that goes vertically or on a diagonal, that's fine, it doesn't matter as long as it doesn't have any curves in it. To name a line, there's two ways to do this. Way number one is to use 2 points. Alright, so suppose we have point A and point B. We would use A and B, the 2 points on our line, and then we would draw a small line above them. That's one way to name it. That's a pretty common way. The only thing you have to remember is to put the little line above it, because we'll get into some other things that are similar to lines, for example, a line segment or array, and they have the same type of thing above them, but it's a little different. So you need to make sure you have a line above the A and the B. The second way is to use a lowercase cursive letter. Usually they have L. Okay, so you can have line AB like that, or we can say line L, or just the cursive L. Now you can use any letter you want as long as it's lowercase and it's cursive. If that's how you want to name it. If you want to name it with the 2 points, you need to make sure that there are at least 2 points on the line. You can pick any two as long as they're on the line, and you put the line above them. One other thing, actually 2 other things about lines. Lines have one dimension. It's length. And what that means is that we can measure it with a ruler. All right, I can take a ruler and I could pick out a specific piece of the line, which is called a line segment. We'll get to that in a minute. And I could put a measurement to it. That's length. We can say how long it is. Now, lines extend infinitely, so there's no way to measure a line itself, but we can measure a line segment. Second thing I want you to know is that 2 lines intersect at a point. Now, lines don't have to intersect. They could be called what's parallel. They could be called parallel, and they don't have to intersect, but if they do, here's an example of 2 intersecting lines. Where they intersect is a point. Okay? So 2 ideas there. Lines have one dimension called length, and 2 lines can intersect at a point. All right, our next word, our last undefined word, is a plane. Now, plane is kind of hard to draw because it's like a line. It extends infinitely, but it extends infinitely in two directions. So there's our first thing. First bullet point. Planes have, lines only have one dimension, planes have two. They have length and width. So here's an example of a plane, and we usually use what's called a parallelogram or a rectangle or a shape like that, four-sided figure, to represent a plane. And we can put the arrows on the outside to show that it extends infinitely in those directions. It's going to keep going on forever. It's very large. But we draw a little shape like that to show that that's what we're talking about, that we have a plane there. So planes have two dimensions, length and width. They extend infinitely in both directions. Okay? A lot of times you won't see the arrows drawn on the end of it, but you need to understand that if it's meant to extend in those two directions. Next thing we're going to talk about is to name a plane. Two different ways, just like a line. First way, use 3 points. And I'm going to put non-collinear after those. We'll get to that word in a minute. Non-collinear just means that they're not on the same line. So I can put 3 points in my plane. Say A, B, and C. If you notice, they're not all on the same line. I can't draw a line that contains all 3 of those. And I could say plane. I'd have to write the word out. A, B, C. And I can use any 3 points as long as they're not on the same line. Way number 2. Use a capital cursive letter. So let's use the letter K. And we would say plain K or just the letter K. Alright? Now that's where it gets confusing, is that one of the things you're going to have to know for the test is how to label these particular things. Name a point, name a line, name a plane. So you need to make sure you understand that. Points are named by just a capital letter. Lines have 2 different methods. 2 points can name it with a little line above it, or a cursive, lowercase letter. And planes, you need to have 3 points that aren't on the same line with the word plane out in front, or you can just use a cursive capital letter. That's really important that you understand those 3 things. Okay, those 3 ways to name those terms. We have one other bullet point for a plane. 2 planes will intersect at a line. Right, and here's the best example I can give you. If you think about a box, and I'm only going to draw 2 sides of this box because we're talking about 2 planes. I've drawn the front and the top. Those 2, if they're planes, they're going to extend infinitely. They intersect right here. And since they keep going out in 2 directions and they intersect, that's going to end up being a line. It's going to continue to extend infinitely just like the planes do. They will continue to intersect on that particular line. So that's what we mean by that, the 2 planes will intersect at a line. Alright, now let's talk about some other terms. These are less difficult to understand. They're pretty easy. Collinear means on the same line. And it refers to points. So here, put 2 points on our line, B and C. Those 2 points are collinear. We could add another point on there, D. All 3 points are on the same line. Our next word, non-collinear, means not on the same line. We talked a little bit about that when we talked about a plane, how to name a plane. You could have 2 points on the line. Let's make them X and Y. And then we have point Z over here. It's not on our line. Okay? That's what it means to be non-collinear. Collinear means on the same line. Non-collinear means not on the same line. Coplanar and non-coplanar. These kind of go the same way as collinear and non-collinear. Coplanar means in or on the same plane. Non-coplanar means not in the same plane. So here are 2 points in the same plane. Here are 3 points that aren't in the same plane. Okay, this point is non-coplanar with the rest of them because it's not in the same plane. Space is just the set of all points. Points, remember we said think about them as locations. There's a whole bunch of points in there. I can pick any spot I want and say, well, there's a point, there's a point, there's a point. Space is all of those points put together, so it's everything. A line segment is a piece of a line. Okay, and you can measure it. This is where that idea of length comes in. I can take a ruler to a line segment and specifically tell you how long it is. Now, a line segment is very similar to a line. The difference is in how we name it. Remember, for a line, we put the little arrows above it. For a line segment, we don't. We just draw a line above it. So that's important, because those are very similar, how to name a line and a line segment. So make sure you understand that. A line segment is just a piece of a line, and we use a little line segment above it. Next idea is between, and we use it for points. A point is in the middle of 2 other points. Okay? All it means is if I had a line segment, I could put a point somewhere in between my 2 endpoints, and that would be between. Okay? Basically like the definition we think of as we use it in everyday life. Something is between 2 things, it's in the middle of those 2. Last idea is congruent, and this is an important one. Congruent means has the same measure. Or that they're equal. Okay? So, if 2 things are congruent, let's say this is 7, that means this one has to be 7. And to show that, we use little hash marks to show that they are the same. So if 2 line segments in particular have those hash marks on them, that means they're congruent. That means they are the same, they're equal to each other. Now this first one I had here with the 7s, that's an example of 2 line segments that are separate. Second example here is 1 big line segment that's divided into 2 pieces, and we do the same thing. You can put hash marks as long as we use the same number of hash marks for both parts. Okay? So those are the words you need to know. If you have any questions about those, make sure you bring those to class next time, especially about point, line, and plane. Those 3 things we're going to continue to use throughout the year, along with the rest of these. But if you have any questions on any of the vocab, be sure to ask them in class.